Okay, so this is the same link that I've already sent out to everybody.
I mean, if there's anyone in the waiting
Let's see. Misaku Lauren. Oh yeah, there's Maurice.
room. All right.
There's
Cool.
a few people. All right, thank you. All right, bye. All right, so we're here. Did you guys join from the link that I sent? I'm assuming.
Hi. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
We had a little bit of I couldn't log in the way I normally do, so I had to get it fixed. So I'm just trying to make sure that the link I sent out
Yeah,
actually
it's
worked.
from the India group,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I guess yeah, there's me there. Okay. I guess the link that I was using
Recording in progress.
expired, so I had to call Asher and get a new link. But it's working now, so that's cool. How many people were missing?
Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi.
Shalom, welcome. Other link here. Give it a few minutes to see if people are coming in. Maybe they thought I don't know. I put the link out there so they know it's happening. So they should be here. Oh, there he is. There's Moshe. Well, he was here. There, he looks like he's connecting again. We have a guest in the house.
Hello, guest.
Did you see it?
The Revison.
Yeah.
What's up?
She got out of bed to join us this morning.
Oh, that's cool. Welcome. Salutations.
So Rosalind, I guess, is not going to make it. So I told her I would try and record the class to send it to her. So I'm not going to like upload it to YouTube or anything. But she usually never misses a class. So I figure I'll go ahead and record it. That way I can just send it to her privately. And oh, Yochanan made it. Good. I was waiting for you. We've been waiting 17 minutes for you. I'm just joking. We logged in like 30 seconds ago. I had a problem logging in. I had to call Asher. All right, so I guess we'll talk about Purim, since that's what's coming up. So, which do you guys want to go through, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch or the Mishneh Torah?
It's the Torah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking because I should pull up another tab and you guys are still here. And what happened?
We're still here.
Okay. All right. Let me figure out how to do another tab. And then, yeah, new tab. Okay. Chabad.org. G. Mishnah, Torah. Hilchot Megillah. See if that brings it up. Chapter 2, chapter 4. I want chapter 1. Start with chapter 2 and see if that can take us to previous chapter 1. Yeah. Okay. Zoom. Share screen. Share. Okay. You see the Chabad.org website now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Good. All right. So I went through the Kitzur first, and then I went through the Mishneh Torah. And so, pop quiz: what is a mitzvah?
Something good that you do. It's a Torah commandment.
Right. It's been turned into anything that you do. Finish the food on your plate. It's a mitzvah. It's a nice thing to do, but the actual definition of a mitzvah is a Torah commandment. What is a halakha?
That's a rabbinical law
Enacted by who?
enacted by the Sanhedrin.
Exactly. So, what is a minhag?
Oh, that's just a custom.
Custom and tradition.
It's a
enacted by-
tradition. It's not. It's something that's not obligatory.
Right.
Something I don't have to do, but it'd be nice to do if I'm in a group of other people that are doing it.
So,
It
if
may
it's
be custom in some communities, something that may not be custom in other communities.
right, that's what makes it. So, if it was a halakha enacted by the Sanhedrin, then that's binding on all of Israel. So, since we don't have a Sanhedrin today, the local rabbi can basically he can act minhagim, customs and traditions for his community, but that's not binding on another community in another town. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I went through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and it's calling all this Purim stuff, a mitzvah. The later you get, like in the Mishnah, there's no halakha to wear a kippah, right? But you start getting into Shulchan Aruch, it starts calling it a minhag. You get to Mishnah Berurah, then it starts saying it's a halakha. They start calling it these things. So when the Shulchan Aruch is saying that it's a mitzvah, I'm like, well, this is not really a mitzvah, right? Because this is after Torah. So then I get to Mishneh Torah, which I'm a big fan of, and right here we see in the first chapter, it's a positive mitzvah ordained by rabbis. And I'm like, come on, Rambam, how can you call this a mitzvah? So the first, let me move this over here so I can get scroll. So the first halakha here, it says it's a positive mitzvah ordained by the rabbis to read the Megillah at the appointed time. It's well known that this was ordained by the prophets. So how can this be a mitzvah? Do we have commentary here? If this happened after Torah. No, this doesn't bring up the commentary. All right, so if you have the physical copy, here you can read the commentary on this. In his introduction to Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam explains that any mitzvah that was ordained after the giving of the Torah to Moses is considered to be rabbinic in origin, of course. Even though the reading of the Megillah is alluded to in one of the books of the Bible, he's referring to the book of Esther, which is not Torah, it's part of Tanakh, but not the Torah section of Tanakh. It's still included in this category. So he's saying here he's including it in the category of vote, but he's admitting that it's ordained rabbinically. So this would actually be a halakha, even though he's calling it a mitzvah. Oh, we do have commentary here. I guess when you hover over it. Okay. So anyway, we all understand this is not something given by God that we have to do. So we really shouldn't be calling it a mitzvah because otherwise we just start conflating everything that nobody knows the difference. Well, if my rabbi said to do it, then it must be a mitzvah. when it might not even be a halakha. It might just be his minhag, which he feels is binding on you, but it's not really right to be calling it a mitzvah because then it waters it down. There's the whole concept of suffik de rabbanan lechakel, the suffik de deoraita lechumra. If it's from the Torah, it's a commandment, we're supposed to be strict. If it's rabbinical, then we're supposed to be lenient when there's a doubt. So when there's a doubt about something, you need to be able to identify, is this a Torah commandment we're talking about, or is this something rabbinical that we're talking about? Because then you'll know how the rule applies. If we're supposed to be lenient on it, or if we're supposed to be strict. And this is only, of course, in the case of a doubt. I mean, just because something's rabbinical does not mean that we don't have to follow it, because if it was enacted by the Sanhedrin, then we do have to follow the halakha. So, Chabad has the schedule of the holidays. Are we allowed to work? Are we not? Obviously, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, these are from the Torah. We don't work on these days. So what about Purim? Not from the Torah. So if you can see right here, I got this thing covering what I said, but it says, if you can see, can everybody read?
Yeah, yeah.
It
Yes,
says
yes.
not obligatory.
Correct. So it does say that work should be avoided. Consult a rabbi if this is not possible. This is your clue. If you're looking up Yom Kippur, holiest day of the year, Shabbat Shabbaton, Sabbath of all Sabbaths, the Day of Atonement, can we say, do we have to work? Well, consult your rabbi. Your rabbi can't tell you to go to work on Yom Kippur. We don't have the authority for that. So the fact that it's telling you to consult a rabbi means the rabbi can tell you, in your situation, okay, this is what you should do. So these are the things to look for when you see mitzvah. It's like, well, Purim is not technically a mitzvah. It's not really on that level. It doesn't mean we should disregard it, not take it seriously. Okay, so everyone understands so far?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so everyone is obligated in this reading. Men, women, we'll cover this coming up in a little bit, but they are obligated, as we see. Converts and freed slaves. Children should also be trained to read it. Even the priests should neglect their service in the temple and come to hear the reading of the Megillah. Similarly, Torah study should be neglected to hear the reading of the Megillah. Surely this applies to other mitzvot of the Torah. The observance of all of them is superseded by the reading of the Megillah. So Rambam is saying here, he's putting this on the level that pretty much of a mitzvah, just to say that this is very important. Don't be lax on it. There's nothing that takes priority over the reading of the Megillah except the burial of I think this is called meat mitzvah, a corpse that has no one to take care of it. A person who encounters such a corpse should bury it and then read the Megillah. So if you're going to hear the Megillah read and you come across this, you can postpone going to hear the Megillah read. I doubt we'll find ourselves in that situation. But we can see that Rambam is taking this pretty seriously. One can fulfill one's obligation by reading or by listening to another person's reading, providing one listens to a person who is obligated to hear the reading. For this reason, if the reader was a minority or mentally incompetent, one who hears this reading does not fulfill his obligation. Now, the reason this is kind of important is, there are some communities that will not allow a woman to read the Megillah. But as we see here, everyone is obligated in this reading, including women. So you can fulfill your obligation by reading or listening to it, provided one listens to a person who is obligated. A woman is obligated. So there are people who will not let a woman read. However, if you are in a community where there is a woman there who knows how to read, and she does, you can fulfill your obligation by listening to the woman read.
How can it be an obligation if it's not obligatory?
So it's halakhically obligated, but it's not a mitzvah.
Okay.
So you see where he's saying here on the next one, it's a mitzvah to read the entire Megillah. It's not really a mitzvah because it's not in Torah. This happened after Torah. So the reason why he's doing this is he's talking about the mitzvah of lo tasor, not to stray to the left or the right of the rulings of the court. So he's saying if the Sanhedrin enacted this halacha, then you are complying with the mitzvah to not stray to the left or the right of the ruling of that court. So you're complying with the halacha, and he's saying it's a mitzvah to do that because there is a mitzvah in Torah that tells you to. However, I don't like this. I mean, I understand this definition. That's why the halacha is obligatory and not optional. However, you really have to make the distinction that that's only talking about halacha, because otherwise you could say, well, it's a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. So anything a rabbi tells you today, you're violating a mitzvah if you don't listen to it. You have to follow his minhag because you're violating the mitzvah that tells you to listen to the rabbi. It doesn't tell you to listen to every person that grows a beard, puts on a black hat, and calls himself a rabbi. What gave the Sanhedrin the authority to judge was that they had smicha, going back to Moses, and they sat in the room of the hewn stones. This is where Hashem chose, the place that I will choose. This is what the Torah says. So that's why we have to make a distinction between the Sanhedrin and somebody else. If some Reform rabbi walks up to you and says, hey, we're having shrimp here at our Shabbat meal. You need to eat. You know, it's polite. Is it now a mitzvah to listen to this rabbi and eat the shrimp? Of course not. He doesn't have the authority that the Sanhedrin has. So the mitzvah of not straying to the left or the right rulings of court applied to the Sanhedrin. 3 rabbis today calling themselves a Bet Din does not have the authority that the Sanhedrin has. That's why I don't like calling it a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah to listen to the Sanhedrin, but what they enact is a halakha. What I tell you guys to do today is not a halakha. So you see how we can be deceived easily into thinking that it's a mitzvah to listen to your current modern day rabbi? It's really not. So that's why I don't like calling this a mitzvah. Even though I agree it is a mitzvah to listen to the Sanhedrin. But when the Sanhedrin enacts something, it should be called a halakha, not a mitzvah. Because otherwise it's just too confusing. Too many people don't know the difference as it is. So he's calling. Yeah.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically you're saying that even though it's a mitzvah for a Jew to listen to the Sanhedrin and his decisions, okay, you wanna be more clear in like defining the mitzvot from the Torah and the mitzvot and the halachot from the Sanhedrin. This is the distinction that you are trying to make, right?
Right. So
Okay.
let me say to be more
Thanks.
clear, there's 613 commandments in the Torah, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so those 613 commandments, those are the mitzvot. Those are the Torah commandments. So halacha is what the Sanhedrin enacted. Like the Torah doesn't tell you can't have chicken and milk together. It's not in Torah. So the court, the Sanhedrin said, we're going to enact a law, a halacha, that says you cannot mix fowl and dairy because we don't want people to see you eating chicken and cheese and think that you're eating meat and cheese, which the Torah prohibits. The Torah says not to cook a kid in his mother's milk. This is, what it refers to when it's talking about meat and dairy. So according to the Torah, you cannot cook the meat with the cheese. But a bird, chicken, would be allowed from the Torah. So the halacha that the court enacted is don't mix the chicken and cheese, because then people might think it's okay to mix beef and cheese, or they might think that you're eating beef and cheese when it's really chicken and cheese. So the court enacted different laws than what the Torah did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I have another question about the word that in the Torah refers to the meat. So there is a distinction between the word that is used for the meat of an animal like the sheep's and the meat of a bird in the Torah. Like there is a distinction in Hebrew actually.
Yes, it says not to boil a kid in its mother's milk. A kid is literally a goat, but this is understood to mean goats, sheeps, and it's even extended to things like cows. Bird is a completely different category, so it wouldn't apply to those biblically.
Well, birds
from the Torah.
birds can't produce milk,
Right.
so I
So
stand
from
on
the
that.
Torah, it's actually cooking. You have to remember the word cooking is there, bishul. So from the Torah, if you were to cook a goat, let's say on a grill, right? You've baked, you've cooked a goat burger. And then you want to take a piece of cheese, which is dairy, after you've cooked the burger and put the cheese on the goat burger, that would be allowed from the Torah. Because the Torah says you can't cook them together. Meaning you can't be cooking the burger on the grill and put the cheese on it to melt. Now you're cooking them together. This is what the Torah prohibits. Cooking them together. Once they're already cooked, if you were to refrigerate them, put the cheese on the meat, that would be allowed from the Torah. Because the Torah prohibits cooking them together. So later, the rabbis came and said, no, this doesn't apply to chicken at all. So the rabbis came and prohibited it together. This is why in the laws of forbidden foods, it says you can go from, if you're eating chicken, or I'm sorry, if you're eating dairy, you can go directly to chicken right away. Because if you're eating the dairy first, there's no chicken stuck between your teeth. There's no meat for the dairy to mix with. So if you're eating dairy, then you can eat meat immediately, right away. They want to put the waiting period in for the reverse. But the waiting period is not definitive. You could wait, 2 minutes, you could wait 6 hours, some people wait 24 hours. But if you rinse your mouth or clean your teeth, you can go immediately from chicken to dairy. No waiting period. So does that answer your question about the difference between chicken versus the goat and sheep?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mea
Okay.
אחוז, 100%.
Okay. Good. All right. Where were we? Okay. So he says it's a mitzvah, but it's really a halakha. But he knows, like we read from the commentary, he understands it's coming from the court, so he knows it's a halakha. He's just basically telling you here that there is a mitzvah, not to stray to the left or right of the rulings of the court. So he's saying you're complying with that mitzvah to follow the halakha. But I just don't want people to confuse, say, well, it's an actual mitzvah. So it should be called a halakha, but he's using the word mitzvah. So it's a halakha to read the entire Megillah and to read it both at night and during the day. The entire night is an appropriate time for the night reading, and the entire day is appropriate for the day reading. Before the reading at night, one should recite these three blessings. And we'll skip through them, but here they are. During the day, one should not recite the final blessing. In places where it's customary to recite a blessing after reading, the following blessing should be recited. And if you guys are reading them, you can look these up later. What is the appropriate time for the Megillah to be read? The sages ordained, and by sages, this is what we're talking about, Sanhedrin, not modern day rabbis that don't have the authority of the Sanhedrin. They ordained many different times for its reading, as implied by Esther 9:31. To confirm these days of Purim and their appointed times, the following are the days on which the Megillah is read. Important to notice that it's talking about, as implied by Esther. We don't get halakha from the book of Esther. We don't get halakha from the Zohar. We don't get halakha from the book of Isaiah. We get halakha from the Talmud. So that's why it's saying the sages ordained.
Specifically the Mishneh.
Right, because those were the sages that had smicha going back to Moses. Those were the Tanaim. Those were the ones that sat and had.
Not the Gemara.
Right, so this is what they used to justify what they ruled. So we're not doing it because the book of Esther says. We're doing it because the Sanhedrin looked at the book of Esther, and then they discussed it, they voted, and then they enacted the halakha. So I just don't want anyone to look at the book of Esther or the Psalms and say, well, this is where we get our halakha from. It comes from the Sanhedrin. they used this material to debate and decide what the halakha should be. This was their source material, that they used to decide what the halakha was going to be. So every city, whether in Israel or the diaspora that was surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua ben Nun, should be read the Megillah on the 15th of Adar. This applies even when a wall does not surround the city at present. I think most of us are going to be in a different geographical location where this is not really applicable. Every city that was not surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua should read the Megillah on the 14th. So that's when we'll be reading it, because there were no walls surrounding the cities in America where I live during the time of Joshua. The capital of Shushan, in the capital of Shushan, the Megillah is read on the 15th, although it was not surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua ben Nun, because the miracle occurred within it at that time. The Jews celebrated on that day. This is where the story takes place in Persia. And they rested on the 15th. Why was the matter made dependent on the time of Joshua ben Nun to give honor to the cities of Israel that were in ruin at the time of the Purim miracle? Although they are in ruin at present, this would allow them to read the Megillah on the 15th, as do the inhabitants of Shushan, since they were surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua. Thus, the commemoration of the miracle would include the remembrance of Israel. The sages ordained that the inhabitants of the villages who gather in the synagogues only do on Mondays and Thursdays could read the Megillah earlier on the day when they gather in synagogues. What is implied, if the 14th of Adar falls on either Monday or Thursday, the Megillah is read on that day. If it falls on any other day than Monday or Thursday, we read on an earlier date on the Monday or Thursday that is closest to the 14th of Adar. Okay, this is kind of confusing, but we're going to ignore it, and I'll show you why in a minute. But you guys know we should be reading the Torah on the Torah Parsha on Mondays and Thursdays, right? As well as Shabbat. You guys, so we're supposed to read the Parsha 3 times. You're supposed to hear it twice in Hebrew and once in Aramaic, whatever your native language is. But if you're in a community that can get a minyan together, they will do so on Mondays and Thursdays. So that's what this is talking about. If you don't have a community that has enough people for a minyan, they're probably not going to do it. So they're not going to be doing this either. So this is the distinction that it's making. So it's saying here, you can on Mondays and Thursdays. Then it's saying here that if you read it on an earlier date, we're going to ignore that, and I'll show you why it'll be coming up where this is not applicable. So what's implied? If the 14th of Adar falls on a Sunday, then the Megillah is read on the previous Thursday. This is if you have a community that's meeting on that Thursday to do it. The 11th of Adar, if the 14th falls on a Tuesday, the Megillah is read earlier. Monday, the 13th, if it falls on a Wednesday, the Megillah is read earlier on the 12th. Whenever license is granted to read the Megillah before the 14th, it should not be read unless 10 are present, if you have a minyan. We're not going to be reading this before then, I don't think. So we'll be doing it on Sunday, the 14th. However, because of the fast, if you're gonna do the fast, does get moved to Thursday. So in a village where Jews do not gather together to read the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays, the Megillah should be read only on the 14th of Adar, Sunday. Why is it a village where they're not gathering together to read on Mondays and Thursdays? Because they don't have enough people to do it. Which is why this is really not even going to be so applicable. So when a city does not have 10 people, should only be read on the 14th. When a city does not have 10 people who have no other occupation but to attend the synagogue for communal purposes, it's considered to be a village, and the Megillah is read earlier on the day when people gather in the synagogue. So I'm assuming you guys are all in locations that do not have 10 unemployed people whose full-time occupation is to be at the synagogue in case someone needs a minyan. That's what's considered a big city. If you don't have that, you're considered a village, which this is pretty much what applies to all of us. We're not in an area where there's 10 people at the synagogue every day, no matter what. So if a city lacks 10 adult men, the very difficulty leads to its solution. and they are considered to be like the inhabitants of a large city, and read the Megillah only on the 14th. That's what it's talking about, where if you don't have the 10 men, if you're going to get together before the 14th, you'll get together whenever you normally get together on Shabbat. Whenever the people are getting together, that's when you would do it. But again, we're going to do it on Sunday because that's the appropriate day, as we'll see coming up. When does the above leniency apply? That it's possible to read the Megillah earlier on the day people gather in the synagogue. When does that apply? When Israel rules itself. In the present era, however, the Megillah is read only at its appropriate times, the 14th of Adar and the 15th. The inhabitants of the villages and cities read on the 14th, and the inhabitants of walled cities on the 15th. Now, when he is saying here in the present era, remember this is Rambam lived from 1135 to 1204 of the common area, so that's what this is referring to as the present area, because that's present era, because that's when it was written. And this may be one of the things that I made a note on in the commentary here. Yeah, so in Rambam's time is what he's calling the common era, when Israel rules itself. Israel did not rule itself in the time that Rambam was alive. So what about today? Does Israel rule itself? Can we say that this is not the current era? When does it apply? When Israel rules itself? Just because we have a state of Israel today, it's what's the word? Sovereign nation. Does Israel rule itself? Is that the Israel we're talking about? There's some people who might say yes. Oh, this is the miracle, Israel being, this is the resurrection of biblical Israel, which clearly it's not. But there are those that'll say that because we're in the land, that now it applies. So according to the commentary on this, in Rambam's commentary to the Mishneh, Rambam writes, the Megillah is read at different times only when our hand is strong. There is the potential to enforce the complete observance of mitzvot. In the present age, from the time which the Talmud was composed until the coming of the Mashiach, may he come speedily, the Megillah is read only at its appropriate times, 14th and the 15th of Adar. Obviously, I think everyone agrees we don't have Mashiach today. When it says that Israel's hand is strong and there's a potential to enforce the complete observance of mitzvot, who's going to enforce it? We don't have a Sanhedrin. If you violate this, nobody's going to come give you lashes, so that's not today's time. That would be Rambam's opinion. The Rambam's words are based on and allow for a unique interpretation of the following passage from Megillah 2a. When does the above, that the Megillah can be read at different times, hold true? In a proper time when the Jewish people live in their land. In contrast, in the present era, since the people calculate from it, it should be read only at its appropriate time. This is the way the passage appears in our texts of the Talmud. This is how Rambam would interpret it. I agree. So then it goes on to say, Rashi explains that this means at a time when Israel enjoyed independence. So Rashi would disagree, and those who follow with Rashi would say, no. Israel is independent. All the people enjoying the gay pride parades in Tel Aviv, that's Israel. That's biblical Israel because it's a geographical location. So the Rashi followers would disagree. Rambam would say it's appropriate to read on the 14th of Adar. So I'm going to skip over the rest of what Rashi says. And then it goes to the Rif, who was the Rambam learned from a student of the Rif. So Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, the text of this passage is, however, slightly different. He renders the final sentence. In the present era, since there is a danger involved, it should only be read in its appropriate time, the 14th. The Rambam, who was a student of Rabbeinu Yitzhak Alfasi's disciple, Rav Yosef Ibn Migash, followed this version of the text. And he explains that what the danger mentioned by our sages was that the rabbis could not enforce the complete observance of the mitzvot, just like they can't enforce it today. We don't have a Sanhedrin. Therefore, one group might decide to hold the Megillah reading on a previous day and one on the appropriate day without any responsibility to a higher authority. This would lead to the violation of the commandment, do not break into separate groups of observance. In contrast, when the Sanhedrin was in power, Jewish observance was controlled by this central body. So we should not have different groups doing different things. We should be unified, and that is that we should be reading it on the 14th, on Sunday. This is the opinion of Rambam, and this is the opinion of the Rif. Now, those of you who know the Shulchan Aruch, how do we get, what's the halakha in the Shulchan Aruch? It's 2 out of 3, the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. Whenever 2 agreed, that's what goes in the Shulchan Aruch. We have right here the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. They agree, so that's what the halakha should be, not what the dissenting opinion is, which followers of Rashi would say, well, I'm a dissenting opinion, I disagree. Well, we have the 2 out of the 3. That's what it should be. It should be read on the 14th. I recently learned a pretty good thing from Chaim Ovadia. He was talking about what happens if you get taken to court. Let's say there's a dispute, a monetary dispute. Somebody claims, this guy owes money. Well, does he owe the money or not? Well, if the judge says, okay, according to these 2 opinions, you owe the money. You borrowed, there was witnesses, you agreed to pay it back. We have 2 examples here. You're supposed to pay the money back. The person could say, well, there's a dissenting opinion on this, and I hold by that dissenting opinion, right? The person in court who doesn't want to pay. Anybody could do this. A lawyer could teach you to do this because there's dissenting opinions on everything. So they ruled that just because there is a dissenting opinion doesn't mean that gets you out of it. Okay, the judges have the authority to rule that we have these 2 opinions that agree, so this is how we're going to decide the case. Because if we were to allow you to say that somewhere in the Talmud, somebody gives a dissenting opinion, that would hold up the whole legal process. It would hold up every case, because every case somebody would be able to say, somewhere somebody disagrees. So that's what's happening here. There's an example where Rashi disagrees, but we have the Rif and the Rambam, which is not just two people. These are the 2 of the 3 that when they agree, that's what goes into the Shulchan Aruch, which is the most widely accepted book of Jewish law, right? So the fact that there is a dissenting opinion doesn't have so much weight, because if you were to ignore these two big ones, you would be violating the commandment not to create, separate, how did it say?
But it also says, do not follow the majority to do evil.
Right.
Which is a mitzvah.
So you would be correct to continue arguing for what makes sense to you, which is why I'm not saying Rashi cannot argue for his opinion. I'm not saying he can't have a dissenting opinion. But we're not supposed to break into separate groups of observance. So let's say I was a Rashi follower and I go to a synagogue and I'm like, well, we're going to read it on Thursday. I would disagree with that. I would say
you go into a synagogue and you go into a synagogue and say, it's not always black and white.
Right. If I was a Rashi follower, I would say I have a right to disagree. I have a right to have a dissenting opinion. I don't have to agree with you because you're the majority. It doesn't have to make sense to me, but I should not be breaking up into a separate group and saying, well, I'm going to go do something different. The majority, in this case, the Rif and the Rambam, say we're supposed to be reading it on the 14th. So that's when it should be read. I do lots of things, by the way, that I disagree with. I think the Sanhedrin enacted some things that I think they got wrong. I think we should be allowed to eat chicken and cheese sandwiches. I think the logic that they used to arrive at their conclusion that this is illegal, it's against the halakha, I think was flawed. However, I can't create my own separate group and say, well, we're going to do it here in my community, because I would be guilty of breaking into a separate group of observance. So even though I have a dissenting opinion, I disagree with what the halakha is. I mean, how they ruled the halakha, I agree they had the authority to enact the halakha, and I have to abide by it. I can't start a separate group that violates the halakha just because I don't like it. Even if I disagree with how they came to this final conclusion, I have to agree they had the authority to do it. That was the majority. I can't start a separate group. So I don't eat chicken and cheese. I follow the halakha that I think was stupidly enacted, but I understand they had the authority to enact it. They did it, so I comply with it. So that's what this is saying here. Even though Rashi disagrees, he shouldn't be starting a new community. The majority is the Rif and the Rambam, so that's the halakha. Make sense to everybody?
Absolutely, yes. But I have a question. This is
Yeah.
the phrase that you will hear all the time from me. But I have a question. Okay, my question is about the Sanhedrin, okay? Because I know that till a certain point in time, like a couple of centuries before Rambam, there were still rabbis who had the smicha from the Moshe times, okay?
Right.
So they had the authority to make statements of halakha. But now, if we have to rebuild the Sanhedrin, okay, in Israel, how that could be possible? Like, there are rules. I assume there are rules about that, how to rebuild the Sanhedrin, etc. Can you help me understand how that works, please?
Okay, so the smicha there's different generations. Like, we have baby boomers, and then Generation X, and then millennials. You're familiar with that, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the same thing. There was different generations from Moses all the way to the time of the Sanhedrin. Okay, the Tanaim. This is a generation that had smicha going back to Moses. After the Tanaim, then you had the Amoraim, the different generation. Okay, then you had the Geonim, you had the Rishonim, then you have the Achronim. These are all just like baby boomers, Generation X, millennials. This is Tanaim, Amoraim, Geonim, different generations. So the Tanaim, these were the generation that had smicha going from them all the way back to Moses. So these were the people that sat on the Sanhedrin. This is why when you read the Mishneh in the Talmud, which is the Mishneh and the Gemara, the Mishneh, this is the section that was the Tanaim. Tanaim is a generation that had smicha going all the way back to Moses. Okay, then when you get to the Gemara, this is a new generation. This is the Amoraim. The Amoraim were the students of the Tanaim. The Tanaim had smicha going back to Moses. The Amoraim did not. So the Amoraim and beyond, they did not have smicha going back to Moses. So
the Amoraim's rulings that's in the Gemara are basically
just like mine and yours.
Yeah, just like mine. Right. It don't matter.
They're out. Well, I mean, they were the students, so they were a little closer. So they probably, some of them had personal interactions with actual Tanakh. But as far as the authoritative, they don't have smicha going back to Moses. Then what's the difference between you and them? You're a person that doesn't have that smicha. The rabbis in the Gemara are people that do not have that smicha. So assuming you can read the Hebrew as well as they could, your opinion is just as valid as theirs. There's no difference, right? So smicha ended with the Tanaim. Of course, there was a couple of the Amoraim that supposedly had smicha. They were the students, so they knew directly, but it was only a handful of them. In general, the Amoraim did not have smicha. So every scholar, every academic person understands the actual smicha that the Tanaim had going back to Moses ended around 359 of the Common Era, 4th century. It's gone. It's gone forever.
But there's a midrash. There's a midrash that says that they do have smicha,
which I'm going to get to. But this is why I started off by saying every academic scholar, everyone that you can look at and say, this is a historian, this guy knows his history, they will tell you smicha. Once you have destroyed something, it's gone. How do you get it back? You can build a replica of it, but it's not the same. It's gone forever. So Rambam comes up with a theory. How can we reinstitute smicha? It's gone forever. How do you get it back? So his theory was that there's a way to bring it back, which was if you can get everyone in the generation to agree to give that guy smicha, then that guy can take this smicha that everybody gave him. He can give it to his student can give it to his student, and we can bring it back. But it won't be the original one because the original one's gone. So it's not a halakhic way to do it because the Sanhedrin never said this is how you do it. This is Rambam's opinion, and we know because he says, it seems to me that this would be a way that we could do it. When he says it seems to me, I'm telling you it's his opinion on how to bring back a smicha, but not the original one. This in itself is problematic because what does it mean? Well, if everybody agrees to give this one individual smicha, who is everybody? Does that mean you have to have 100%? What if there's someone that says, you know what? I don't like that guy. I don't agree. I don't think he should have smicha. Does he get it? This is problematic. Even if you agree, okay, well, it doesn't mean everyone, it means some percentage of the people. And we've achieved this percentage of the people agree to give this very popular person smicha. Well, now you have people that don't have smicha voting to give him smicha. You have people that say, well, you know what? I don't have smicha, and you don't have smicha, but we're going to vote to give him smicha. So this is a pretty problematic process. Either way, people accepted Rambam's idea. They said, okay, let's do it. Let's give that guy smicha. Not the original one, because we don't have it. We don't know what it is. But they agreed to give a guy smicha. Forget what his name was, but he gave Yosef Karo that smicha, the new smicha. Yosef Karo was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, so he was one of the first people to get this newly reinvented smicha, which is not a direct chain from Moses to Yosef Karo. It was completely severed. So this is the new smicha that Yosef Karo had. So there are rabbis today that think they have the smicha going back to Moses, which is what Moshe is bringing up. Medrash. Oh no, my smicha is directly from Moses. There's an unbroken chain. There are people who believe that, but the majority of scholars and academics will not agree with it. It's just like saying, well, you know, I am a direct descendant of Abraham through the mother all the way. Unbroken chain, no female converts in my line. Okay. You can believe that if you want. Can I disprove it if you make that claim? Can I come in and say, well, actually, here's your great grandmother. She converted, not a pureblood. No, I can't disprove your claim, but no serious person believes that claim. And nobody that makes that claim can prove it. So when somebody tells you that they have smicha going back to Moses, they can't prove it, and no academic believes that. Everyone's knowledgeable knows it was broken, reinvented.
Aren't we all descendants going back to Noah?
Yes, but Abraham was after. So the claim is that they're one of the descendants from Jacob through Isaac to Abraham. Abraham was a grandson of Noah. So they're not denying they're descendant of Noah. They're saying after Noah repopulated the earth, we are now a direct descendant of Abraham through Jacob, a claim that cannot be proven. So how would we build the Sanhedrin today? You'd have to get a consensus, which we don't have among the people. Who's going to run it? You think Satmar wants Chabad running the new Sanhedrin? You think Chabad wants the Juri Karta running the new Sanhedrin? For sure not. Are they going to accept reform? No. Is reform going to say they shouldn't have a seat at the table? They're not going to say that either. So how can we rebuild a new one? You're going to have to get a consensus among the people to build a new one. And that's why we don't have one today. Make sense?
It makes sense and it makes feel like really bad. I didn't know that, and I'm like freaking out right now because I'm thinking, damn, okay, our rabbis, okay, they thought about even the most strange details in the universe, and they didn't came up with a way, with a logic, a logic way to get out of this. How can it be
So
like that? Yeah.
it did actually. In Hilchot Mamrim, which is what tells you how halakha functions, it says that only the Sanhedrin can enact the halakha. In an era where you don't have the Sanhedrin, which is today, we don't have the Sanhedrin, then local communities can establish minhagim, a custom and tradition for their local community. But that minhag is not binding any other community because it's not a halakha. That's the difference between a minhag and a halakha. So only the Sanhedrin, we don't have today, can ratify their local minhag into a halakha. Because when they do that, now that halakha becomes binding on all of Israel. That's the authority that the Sanhedrin had. That's why we have to make a distinction between what's a minhag and what's a halakha. So in their wisdom, and this is the very beginning of Hilchot Mamre, it says, in an era where there is no Sanhedrin, that's today, where a local community cannot overrule a halakha. Only a Sanhedrin can overrule a previous halakha, meaning anything that they ruled, like not eating chicken and cheese, that is in force unless a Sanhedrin overrules it, because only a Sanhedrin can overrule the previous ruling. So how do we do that? If you don't have a Sanhedrin, they gave you two conditions that must be met. It must be a Sanhedrin greater in wisdom and greater in knowledge. If this wasn't clear enough, it then says, if you have a Sanhedrin greater in wisdom, but they are not greater in number, they can't overrule it. If you have a Sanhedrin that's greater in number of adherents, but not greater in wisdom, then they can't overrule it. It must be both, greater in number and greater in wisdom. So it tells you if we have a new Sanhedrin, greater in number and greater in wisdom, then they can overrule this stuff. That's the process that it laid out. But since we don't have that Sanhedrin, everything the last one ruled is still in place until we get a new one that meets those two criteria that we don't have today. And the problem is, because the Mishneh Torah is the only complete codification of halacha that handles how the Sanhedrin functioned, that handles temple sacrifices, that's where we learn this. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't have these things. The Shulchan Aruch only deals with what's applicable today. Since we don't have a temple, it's not going to talk about sacrifices.
Galut mode, right?
What's that?
Galut mode, galuth, like
yeah,
exile mode.
Right. And since we don't have a Sanhedrin, Shulchan Aruch's not going to talk about the Sanhedrin. So because people like the Shulchan Aruch, which doesn't cover this, they don't know that Mishneh Torah does, which is the only place you can go to learn how it works. And that's where we find this in Hilchot Mamre. But because people don't read Mishneh Torah, they read the incomplete book, the Shulchan Aruch, which doesn't cover it, so they don't know how halakha functions. So to them, it's just whatever your rabbi says. Your rabbi, who also has never read Hilchot Mamrim, which tells you how it functions. This is why when you go ask any rabbi, how does halakha function? 10 different rabbis will give you 10 different explanations, but they all end with the same statement. You have to ask your rabbi. Rambam doesn't make that statement. Rambam gives us Hilchot Mamrim, which tells us what the Sanhedrin actually said. So this is one of many reasons why Mishneh Torah is superior to Shulchan Aruch, because it's complete. It handles things like this. Some of these things are pretty important, as we're discussing. So that's the process for overruling the previous Sanhedrin. You need a new one. And it does tell us how to do it. You won't find it in the Shulchan Aruch.
So that's the reason why even in Pesach, we say the next year in Jerusalem, and even people like I'm talking about people living in Israel, Jews living in Israel, even in Yerushalayim, even in Jerusalem, and they keep saying that because we, from Halakha perspective, we are still in exile. That's
Yeah,
the reason why.
we're still in exile, but I think the reason they're saying it is because there's this obsession with Mashiach nowadays. You go anywhere Jewish, and you're gonna have people say, "What do we want?" And everyone's gonna yell, "Mashiach now!" So I think that's why we're saying next year in Yerushalayim, because we're hoping Mashiach will come and gather the exiles and bring us all to the land.
Speedily in our days.
I don't think they've thought it through enough to say, well, if next year we are in Jerusalem, that means that we'll have a Sanhedrin who will be executing us for any violation of Shabbat. They're just thinking, well, everyone says we want Mashiach now, so that's what we want, because everything will be wonderful once we get them. They don't think it through far enough to understand that means there will be a Sanhedrin, and all these things that we're talking about will be enforceable. You won't be reading the Megillah prior to the 14th because you'll have a Sanhedrin that'll issue serious consequences if you violate what they say. You won't have somebody say, shame on you. If you eat a chicken and cheese sandwich, you will be literally physically punished in this world if you get caught violating what they say. So they're just stuck on the first part. Well, Mashiach now, things will be good. They're not actually saying we want next year to have everything that entails. They haven't thought it that far through, I don't think.
I think,
Rabbi.
yeah, I will stop.
yeah,
Okay,
go.
I ask you.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh.
All right.
I was gonna say, at least my opinion is that a Sanhedrin could work as long as we get the top leaders from each observance level of the community, and it just all comes together at one place, and you guys have to work it out. Because if I'm looking at the Sadducees, they didn't believe what the Pharisees believed, and yet we had a Sanhedrin nonetheless.
Right.
So I think if they worked it out that way, so everyone gets a fair say from the highest observance to wherever it goes, and these are the ones that's selected, you work it out for the betterment of us all. Because I know it'll never work if we're just all have to rule on, okay, well, we're going to go with what Breslev says. They'll be the leaders. No one's going to agree to that. But if everyone can get in from different groups, we make the numbers, and then we can go from there.
Right. That's the way it worked. We had Pharisees, Sadducees sitting on the Sanhedrin. You know, Hillel and Shammai didn't agree, but they married into each other's families, which showed the level of tolerance for each other. Rabbi Eleazar did things that the rest of the Sanhedrin considered to be a violation of Shabbat, and they made no effort to stop him until they got to the oven of Aknai, and that's the whole Bava Metzia 59b story. But there was a level of tolerance for others who disagreed. And I was thinking about this. Well, side note, I was thinking about this morning. You guys know, those that have been here before, how I've talked about you say a barecha before you do something, right? Like before you follow a mitzvah. But the way I learned, you say the barecha for lighting the Shabbat candles after you light them, because once you say the barecha, you've accepted Shabbat upon yourself. The Shabbat doesn't start for 18 minutes or 40 minutes later. Once you say the barecha, you've accepted Shabbat. So you can't light the candle once you've accepted Shabbat. So you have to, the way I learned, you have to light the candle. Then you say the barecha. So now you have accepted Shabbat. So now you're not lighting a fire on Shabbat. You're accepting Shabbat.
Wait a minute. Wait, what about like after using the bathroom or you know, because you say the barecha after you use the bathroom, after you come out. And then also the benching, you know, you say the barecha after you eat.
Yeah, so you're washing your hands after you go to the bathroom. So that's why you're saying the barecha to wash your hands. If you're talking about the other one, thanking God, all your organs are working. It's a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing to thank God for anything, but that particular one is not actually halakha. That one's not mentioned in the Mishneh. So people do it today, but that's not actually a halakhic one. You're not required to say that one. What's the other thing you mentioned? Oh, the benching. That one is mentioned in the Torah that you should eat, and then you should be satiated, and then you shall bless. So that one is telling you that you should do it after you're full. So that's why you're
Okay,
doing
so you don't do it before.
not
You do
not that one.
you do one before you eat, and then you bench after you eat.
Right.
Like
So
okay.
um, what is it called? It's in the why is it slipping my mind right now?
Shalom Aleichem. I know we always say that before, because I go to a Shabbat table, they're all hollering Shalom Aleichem.
Birkat Hamazon. That's what it is.
Birkat Hamazon. Okay.
Yeah, the discussion in the Talmud says we know why we say Birkat Hamazon because it says we should eat, then we should bless. But where do we know that we should? Where does it come from that we bless before? And then it goes into the discussion of why we say a Bereka before we eat for each different kind of food. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. So it makes sense, right? That you light the candle because if you accept Shabbat, you can't light a fire. So you light the candle and then you say the Bereka. But now that you've accepted Shabbat, the fire is already lit. This is why you say the Bereka after. But on Chaim Avadia's playlist, he talks about the people who did the opposite. They said Shabbat didn't start until the candle was lit. So they would say the Bereka, and then they would light the candle. So now this group, they say the Bereka first, then they light the candle. Now Shabbat has started, the candle's lit, you can't extinguish it because we don't put fires out on Shabbat. So they would say the Bereka, then they would light the candle, and then they would set the wick down that they used to light the candle, and they let it burn itself out because they won't extinguish. This means you have a group over here, like me, that says you light, then you say the Bereka. Because when you say the Bereka, you have accepted Shabbat. So according to this group, like me, this other group over here that says the Bereka and then lights, according to this group, you said the Bereka, it's Shabbat. Now you're lighting a candle on Shabbat. These two groups existed together, meaning the group that says it's Shabbat for you, because you said the Bereka, is watching you light a fire on Shabbat, light the candle. This tolerance of this different groups existed at the same time. So this is what Yochanan's bringing up. Breslev and the other groups would have representation, and they would have to tolerate each other. But right now, no one will do that. Everyone wants their group to be the representative and doesn't want to tolerate that there's another group that views things differently. This is why Orthodox unfairly, in my opinion, criticize conservatives for driving. Which we can go to a whole nother discussion about that, but it's a really separate topic. But it's really hypocritical the way they criticize conservatives for allowing their people to drive to the shul, but then they allow their own people to drive to the shul publicly and give them an aliyah to honor them in front of the whole community for doing what they say conservatives are, desecrating Shabbat or allowing, when they themselves allow it, which is pretty much an endorsement of it. Anyway, that's a separate topic. All right, where were we? All right, when a doubt exists and it's unknown whether a city had been surrounded by a wall at this time. All right, we've pretty much covered this. Where we live is there's no doubt. I don't think any of us live in an area where there was a wall. So when it was read, like a leap year last month of the first Adar, and then it's a leap year like this year where we have a second month of Adar, it should be read again in the second month of Adar at its appropriate time, which is this Sunday, the 14th. It should not be read on Shabbat. This is a decree enacted so that one should not take it in one's hands and bring it to a person who knows how to read it. Then you're carrying, thus carrying it 4 cubits in the public domain. Everyone is obligated to read the Megillah, but everyone is not capable of reading. Thus, there is the possibility for such an error to occur. For this reason, the appropriate time For the Megillah to be read falls on Shabbat. We read it earlier on the day prior to the Sabbath. We discuss the laws of Purim on Shabbat to commemorate the fact that it is Purim. What's implied? When the 4th of Adar falls on Shabbat, the inhabitants of the unwalled city should read the Megillah earlier. On Friday, the inhabitants of the walled city should read it at its appropriate time on Sunday. When the 15th falls on Shabbat, the inhabitants of the walled city read the Megillah earlier. Friday the 14th, the inhabitants unwalled cities also read it on the day, for this is the appropriate time for them to read. Thus, in such an instance, everyone reads on the 14th. But for all of us, the way it is applicable today, we're going to read it Sunday. Okay, that's the first chapter. Second chapter, which there's only 2 chapters here in Mishneh Torah. When a person reads the Megillah in improper sequence, he does not fulfill his obligation. You can't cherry pick how you read it, just read it different orders. If a person was reading, forgot a verse, and read the following verse, went back and read the verse he forgot, and then read a third verse, he does not fulfill his obligation because he read a verse in improper sequence. What should he do instead? He should begin from the second verse he forgot and continue reading the Megillah in its proper order. That's the main thing. Just read it in the proper order. Should one encounter a congregation that has already read half of the Megillah, one should not say, I will read the latter half together with this congregation, then go back and read the first half. For this is the reading in improper sequence. Instead, one should read the entire Megillah from beginning to end in order. So if you're going somewhere where it's going to be read, don't show up late. Be on time for this. Should 3. When a person reads the Megillah by heart, does not fulfill his obligation. When a person who speaks a language other than Hebrew hears the Megillah read in Hebrew, written in the Holy Script, fulfills his obligation. Although he does not understand what is being read, similarly, if the Megillah was written in Greek, a person who hears it, even one who speaks Hebrew, fulfills his obligation, although he does not understand what is being read. So if they're reading it in Hebrew and you don't speak Hebrew, you're fulfilling your obligation because it's being read in Hebrew. Something interesting here, not many people know. Okay, similarly, if the Megillah was written in Greek, a person who hears it fulfills his obligation because this would be a kosher Megillah. There's a halakha in here that a Torah scroll could be written in Greek. Did y'all know that?
Did not know that.
You could have, most people don't. You could have a kosher Torah scroll written in Greek. Although, like everything in Judaism, it's disputable, debatable. In his commentary to the Mishneh, Megillah 2:1, Rambam explains that although such a person does not understand every word that is being read, he must have a general conception of the context. Hence, his listening to the reading fulfills the purpose of publicizing the Purim miracle. So you have to read it in English to understand what's happening. Okay, as Rambam explains in his commentary to the Mishnah, classical Greek was considered the equivalent to Hebrew because of the Septuagint, the translation of the Torah into Greek, which had spread among the people. Even a Torah scroll could be written in Greek. Hilchot Megillah. So he says it could be a Greek Torah scroll would be kosher. Although there are those who will say that no longer applies because the Greek language has become corrupted and confused. Therefore, it can no longer be considered kosher. I don't think you'll find a Greek Torah scroll, but that is an interesting halakha that not many people know about. Okay, however, if it was written in Aramaic or another language of Gentile origin, so that would be English, Italian, Tamil, whatever you're speaking, of Gentile origin, one who listens to this reading fulfills his obligation only when he understands that language and only when the Megillah is written in that language. So if you don't speak English and you hear somebody reading it in English, you won't fulfill the mitzvah. But if that's your native tongue, you can have it, listen to it read in that, and you'll fulfill the mitzvah. And contrast, not that you'll fulfill the mitzvah, you'll fulfill your obligation. In contrast, if the Megillah was written in Hebrew and one read in Aramaic, for a person who understood that tongue, one does not fulfill one's obligation, for one is reading by heart. And since the reader cannot fulfill his obligation, the person hearing it read by him also cannot. So if it's written in Hebrew and someone is reading in Aramaic, for a person who understood that tongue, he's basically translating it, then it doesn't fulfill your obligation. Because he's not literally reading. He's like doing his own version of translation. A person who is reading the Megillah without the desired intent does not fulfill his obligation. What is implied? That he was writing a Megillah, explaining it or checking it. If he had the intent to fulfill his obligation with this reading, his obligation is fulfilled. If he did not have the intent, he did not fulfill his obligation. Should one read while dozing off, he fulfills his obligation since he is not sound asleep. When does the statement that a person can fulfill his obligation by reading when writing a Megillah apply? When he intends to fulfill his obligation to read it by reading from the scroll which he is copying. If, however, he intends to fulfill his obligation by reading the scroll that he is writing at present, he does not fulfill his obligation. For one can fulfill one's obligation only by reading from a scroll that was completely written at the time of the reading. Meaning, you're reading a completed Torah scroll, and that's what you're copying, so you're writing one that's incomplete until you finish it. So you can fulfill your obligation by reading it from the one that you're reading in order to copy, but you can't read the incomplete one that you're writing because it's not complete until you've completed writing. So none of us are scribes. We're not writing Megillah scroll, so that doesn't apply to us. That's who it's talking about. A person who errs while reading the Megillah and reads in an inexact manner fulfills his obligation, for we are not required to read in a precise manner. A person fulfills his obligation whether he reads it standing or sitting. This applies even when reading for a congregation. Nevertheless, at the outset, out of respect for the congregation, one should not read for the congregation while sitting. If you're in a wheelchair, if you can't stand up, whatever, then that would be an exception. But if two, and if even 10 people read the Megillah in unison, both the readers and those who listen to the readers fulfill their obligation. An adult and a child can read the Megillah together, even for the community. We should not read the Megillah for a congregation from a scroll that contains other sacred writings. Should one read for the congregation from such a scroll, no one fulfills their obligation unless portions of parchment on which it is written are larger or smaller than those of the remainder of the scroll, so that it will be distinct. An individual for himself, by contrast, may read from such a scroll, even though the portion containing the Megillah is not larger or smaller than the remainder of the scroll, and thus fulfill his obligation. Every Megillah scroll I've ever seen was just that, just the Megillah. It didn't have any other books in it, but this is saying if it did, and this was distinguished separate from them in the same scroll, that would work at a community reading. By yourself, you may read from such a scroll. In Rambam's time, this is what they had, scrolls. They didn't have, Tanakh is over there. They didn't have a book. So if you're not with a community having it read from yourself, you're an individual reading for yourself, then it doesn't have to have that. But no one's gonna, unless you started your own community and you have a Megillah, nobody's gonna be reading it from a Tanakh publicly. A Megillah may be written only with ink on, I don't want to mispronounce these. This is cloth. I don't know what this is. Like a Torah scroll. If it was written with this or this, it's acceptable. any place you go to is gonna have the right type of ink. It must be written on ruled parchment like a Torah scroll. Don't worry about what someone else is reading for you in a shul. And you guys probably don't own one of these Megillahs, so you won't be reading out of that. The following applies when the letters are rubbed out or torn. This would take a scribe to tell you if this is something that's kosher or not. We're not inspecting anybody's Megillah, so we're not going to be concerned if they left out certain letters or verses. That would be for a scribe to decide. A Megillah must be sewn together. The parchments must be joined as a single scroll. Again, this is how it's made. The reader should read the names of Haman's 10 sons and the words which follows in one breath to show the entire people that they were all hung and slain together. It's a universally accepted Jewish custom that as the reader of the Megillah reads, he spreads out the text out as an epistle to show the miracle. When he concludes, he goes back, rolls up the entire text, and recites the concluding blessing. On these 2 days, the 14th and 15th of Adar, it's forbidden to eulogize and fast. This prohibition applies to all people in all places, inhabitants of the walled cities, celebrate on the 15th, and unwalled on the 14th. A leap year, it's forbidden to eulogize and fast on these 2 dates, on the 1st of Adar as well as the 2nd of Adar. The second month of Adar, when the inhabitants reads the villages, read the Megillah earlier on the Monday or Thursday, they're permitted to eulogize and fast on the day they read the Megillah, and that's not us. Although the fast does get moved to Thursday because of Shabbat. Forbidden to eulogize on these 2 days, even though they don't read the Megillah. It's a mitzvah for the inhabitants of the villages to consider on the 14th of Adar. For the inhabitants of walled cities to consider on the 15th of Adar as a day of happiness and festivity. This is why we dress up. We have like a little carnival and there's games to play. It's supposed to be a fun day. When portions of food are sent to one's friends and presents are given to the poor. It's permitted to work on these days. It is not, however, proper to do so. Our sages declare whoever does work on Purim will never see a sign of blessing. Should the inhabitants of villages read the Megillah earlier on a Monday or Thursday and give monetary gifts to the poor on the day which they read, they fulfill their obligation. The rejoicing and festivities on the Purim holiday, by contrast, should be held on the day of the 14th. If they are held earlier, the participants do not fulfill their obligation. A person who conducts the Purim feast at night does not fulfill his obligation. Okay, so hopefully this recording works because I'm going to try and send it to Rosalind. I told her she called me earlier in the week and she was asking about can we give the presents early or does it have to be on separate days or one day? And I told her I'd gone through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and it says in there you can give 2 presents to the same person, and then that person who receives the charity should give 2 presents, but they could give it to 2 separate. You can give one to this individual, one to that individual. So the fact that you can give the 2 gifts to the same person means you can give it on the same day. But I told her I don't remember if it says that they have to be Jews that you give it to. I don't remember if it makes a distinction between giving your charity to Jews or non-Jews. And she said that some rabbi, Avi Grossman, I think was who she said that they have to be Jews. I said, I'm not saying that he's wrong. And this is why I said I don't remember if it made a distinction or not in the Kitzur. So I'm not saying he's wrong, but I want to go back and read it to see if it makes that distinction because I don't remember. So since that conversation, I went through the Mishneh Torah and I looked that up. I mean, I read it last night and then I'm reading it with you guys now. And this is 14. So as we've seen up until this point, those of you that are watching this and listening, we haven't seen anything in this halakha that says you have to give to a Jew versus a non-Jew, right? So Where does it say here? All right. I guess I highlighted something else to talk about too. So we'll come back to that in a second. It's permitted to work on these days. We were talking about that earlier, that it's permitted. You shouldn't, but if you don't have to. It's not, however, proper to do so, our sages declare. Let's look at what that says. The commentary on this states that there were certain places where it was customary to work on Purim, and others where it was customary not to work. In a place where it's customary to work, one may. In a place where it's customary to not work, one should not. This is why it says what I showed you on Chabad. If you can't get out of working, consult the rabbi. This tells you, a rabbi can tell you that you can work because it's not actually prohibited. The conclusion is quoted in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch in its gloss from the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah mentions that it has become customary in all places to prohibit work on Purim. So it's customary in all places that he's aware of not to. However, if you are going to sustain a loss or something, you can't afford to not work, you can go to work. The commentaries on the Mishneh Torah, which was written several hundred years before the Shulchan Aruch, question why Rambam does not mention the differences in custom. I would say because if there's those that have a custom not to, this is why you're allowed to work. This is why he mentions that it's permitted to work. But it says their commentary is saying that perhaps the intent was that in no place is there an absolute prohibition to work, but in all places, even where it is customary to work, this is undesirable. So again, preferably don't work, but if you have to, that's fine. Okay, then it says, our sages declared. Generally, this wording implies that the statement which follows is a direct quote from our sages, and in this instance, no quote of this nature is found. So when it says, our sages declared, usually that means the Sanhedrin declared that. And in this example, there is no specific declaration that it's prohibited or that it's permitted. So that's why it's customary. So if they haven't specifically prohibited it, then it's allowed. You can do it. For something to be prohibited, has to be specifically mentioned. Okay. Not, however, proper to do so, meaning it's undesirable, but not specifically prohibited. Okay. Should inhabitants of the villages read the Megillah earlier on Monday or Thursday and give monetary gifts to the poor on the day which they read, they fulfill their obligation. The rejoicing of festivities of the Purim holiday. Okay, so where does this say that it has to be given to a Jew? I don't see where it says that your charity or your gifts have to go to a Jew. The commentary here says from the wording, I think it's
Hello?
yeah. Okay.
Hello.
All right, so from the wording of this halakha and the Rambam's commentary to the Mishneh, Megillah 1:3, it would appear that although one fulfills the obligation to give gifts to the poor, if one gives before Purim, at the outset, it is preferable to perform this mitzvah on Purim day as well. Note also the Rambam's choice of the word in Halakha 16. See also Megillah 4b, which relates that gifts to the poor were distributed on the day of the Megillah reading, because the poor expected them to be given at the Megillah reading. This also applies to the mitzvah of sending gifts of food to one's friends. This is intrinsically connected with the celebration of Purim and can be fulfilled only on that day itself. Where does that say that this is only to be given to Jews and not non-Jews? I don't see that. So maybe he's got some other source that says that, but I'm not getting it from there. So far, I don't see where that has to go to Jews only. Okay, 15. What is the nature of the obligation for our feast? A person should eat a meal and prepare as an attractive feast as his means permit. He should drink wine until he becomes intoxicated and falls asleep in a stupor. Now, you guys know Asher says all the time he's very against the people saying it's a halakha to become drunk on Purim, so that you can't tell the difference between blessed is Mordecai and cursed be Haman. That comes from the Gemara. It's not in the Mishnah. So that's why he's saying it's not a halakha to become drunk. Similarly, a person is obligated to send 2 portions of meat, either cooked dishes or other foods, to a friend, as implied by Esther, sending portions of food to one another, i.e., 2 portions to one friend. Whoever sends portions to many friends is praiseworthy. If one does not have the means to send presents to food to a friend, one should exchange one's meal with him, each one sending the other what they had prepared for Purim feast. And in this way, they will fulfill the mitzvah of sending presents of food to one's friends. So again, here it just says friends. I don't see where this says they have to be Jewish. It doesn't apply to non-Jews. I'm not seeing that. Okay, what do we have here? Megillah 7b, this is commentary on the Purim. A person is obligated to become so drunk he cannot tell the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai. This is from the Gemara, not the Mishnah. The Rambam loathes, meaning he hates the concept of intoxication. See Hilchot Shivitat Yom Tov 620, where he writes that drunkenness is not happiness, but frivolity and foolishness. It is impossible to serve God while intoxicated. For this reason, he counsels going to sleep, for in this manner one will fulfill the sage's command. While asleep, one will not know the difference between Haman and Mordecai, and yet will be guarded against conducting oneself with impropriety. It must be emphasized that even though those opinions that do not recommend that one fulfill the sage's directive, through sleeping, appreciate that our sages did not desire simple drunkenness, but rather a spirited commitment to God that transcends the limits of our reason. Normally, our minds restrain our commitment to divine service. At the time of Purim miracle, however, the Jews showed self-sacrifice which transcended the limits of their thinking process. Each year on Purim, we relive and express again this unbounded commitment. So, yeah, I would say do not be getting drunk on Purim. You're not up because you might behave in ways that you regret later. You're not obligated to get drunk. All right, 16. One is obligated to distribute charity to the poor on the day of Purim, at the very least to give each of 2 poor people one present, be it money, cooked dishes, other foods, as implied by Esther, gifts to the poor, or 2 gifts to the poor. We should not be discriminating in selecting the recipients of these Purim gifts. Instead, one should give to whomever stretches out his hand. Money given to be distributed on Purim should not be used for other charitable purposes. So to me, if it says we should not be discriminating in selecting the recipients of these Purim gifts, that means we should not be discriminating between you're donating to Jews and giving to non-Jews. Unless this means it's only applicable to Jews, and then we don't have to specify non-Jews. But it says we should not be discriminating. So to me, that means there's nothing wrong with giving to non-Jews. Let's see what the commentary on that says. This halacha 16, right? So 91. Gifts are intrinsically related to the day of Purim. one should give a poor person something that he can benefit from. Money is included in this category because it can be used to purchase food. Okay, right here. Indeed, in certain communities, as an expression of the ways of peace, to have good relations with your neighbors. In certain communities, as an expression of the ways of peace, and not in fulfillment of the Purim mitzvah, it is customary to give even to Gentiles. Okay, so this is saying it's customary to have good relations, to give these gifts to Gentiles, but not in fulfillment of the Purim mitzvah. So if you give to the Gentiles, you don't fulfill the mitzvah of giving. So this would sound like you only fulfill the mitzvah of giving if you give it to a Jew, even though it's customary to give to Gentiles. But how would you know that if you didn't read the commentary? The text itself says we should not be discriminating in selecting the recipients of these Purim gifts. So how would you know that you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of giving a gift unless you give it to a Jew, unless you went and read commentary that was written hundreds of years later after this was written? So I guess it's preferable to give to a Jew. Don't be discriminating in which Jew you give it to. Any Jewish charity is one who's stretching out their hand, I guess. However, if there are no Jewish charities around, you don't know any poor people, give to whatever charity you can find. That's my interpretation on it. Rav Avi Grossman, I think, was who Rosalind said it has to be to Jews. Maybe he's got additional logic that's not present here that makes it clear that you're required to. But the only thing I'm seeing here that makes it clear is not really clear, and you would have to read the commentary to come to that conclusion. So I'm not saying he's wrong, but I'm not telling you guys that you were wrong if you are in a position where you can only give to non-Jewish charities. Some of you guys don't know any Jews, you don't live in Jewish communities. So that's my take on it. I'm not saying he's wrong. You guys have the freedom to do what you want with that. Okay, 17. It's preferable for a person to be more liberal with his donations to the poor than to be lavish in his preparation of the Purim feast or sending portions to his friends. For there is no greater and more splendid happiness than to gladden the hearts of the poor, the orphans, the widows, or the converts. One who brings happiness to the hearts of these unfortunate individuals resembles the divine presence, which Isaiah states describes as having tendency to revive the spirit of the lowly and revive those with broken hearts. So again, I mean, look at what we're reading. If you're donating to orphans that are not Jewish, you're somehow not fulfilling the mitzvah. Again, I'm not seeing that. It's entirely possible that I'm wrong. He knows some source that proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that I'm wrong. But from what I'm looking at it, I don't see where it's absolutely required to give to a Jew over a non-Jew. Unless there's some other source that this assumes you know when you get to reading this source. And I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm not saying he's wrong anyway. I'm just giving you what I'm seeing here. So I'm not challenging him on it. All the books of the prophets and the holy writings will be nullified in the Messianic era. With the exception of the book of Esther, it will continue to exist, as will the 5 books of the Torah and the halachot of the oral law, which will never be nullified. Although all memories of the difficulties endured by our people will be nullified, as Isaiah states, for the former difficulties will be forgotten, they will be hidden from my eye. The celebration of the days of Purim will not be nullified, as Esther states, and these days of Purim will not pass from among the Jews, nor will their remembrance cease from their seed. Because Esther says so? That to me sounds like opinion, but we see why Rambam started off in the beginning saying that this supersedes every Torah mitzvot except for the one to bury the dead who has no one to do it for them. Now, why does this say all the books of the prophets? Okay, this includes Isaiah, Jeremiah, the major prophets, the minor prophets, all the holy writings, like the Psalms, the Proverbs, everything in Tanakh, except for Torah and the halachot of the oral law. Halachot being the rulings of the Sanhedrin, which will never be nullified. This is kind of telling you exactly what we believe here. Torah is obligatory, and so is halacha, because the Torah tells us through the mitzvah of lo tasor, not to stray to the left or right of the rulings of the court. That's why halacha is obligatory. So really, what's obligatory? Torah and halacha. This is kind of telling you the same thing. Even in the Messianic era, which is pretty much his theory, how that's going to play out. What Rambam is saying here, that only the Torah itself and the halacha and the book of Esther will continue to exist. All these other books in Nach will not continue to exist. Of course, this is his opinion. He could be wrong, but again, we see here it's saying because Esther says so, not because the Sanhedrin says so. So this is one of those examples where you have to be able to determine what's opinion, what's actual halakha. Mishneh Torah is 95% halakha, but there is a few things like midrashim and this, which is opinion, which you got to be able to separate. Okay, that concludes Mishneh Torah on Megillah. So I want to go through. I'm not going to go through the whole Kitzer Shulchan Aruch on this, but I do want to address the one thing because it was a discussion between me and Rosalind. Laws concerning the sending of gifts of food, gifts to the needy, and the Purim feast. On Purim, again, this is the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, not Mishneh Torah. Everyone is required to send no less than 2 gifts to one person, as it's written, sending gifts of food to one another, which implies 2 gifts to one person. The more gifts you send to your friends, the more praiseworthy you are. Nevertheless, it's much better to give generously to the poor than to have a lavish feast and to send extravagant gifts to your friends, for there's no greater and more glorious joy before the HaKadosh Baruch Hu than to gladden the hearts of the poor, the orphans, and the widows. Whoever gladdens the hearts of these unfortunates is compared to the divine presence, for it said in Isaiah, to revive the spirit of humble and revive the heart of the crushed. You see, it's Mishneh Torah. Kitzer is basically giving you almost word for word what we find in Mishneh Torah. The third halakha here, everybody, even the poorest in Israel, who is a recipient of charity, is required to give at least 2 gifts to poor persons. That is, 1 gift to each person, for it's written, and gifts to the poor. So if you're a recipient, you're required to pay it forward, which implies 2 gifts to two poor people. You should not be selective when giving charity on Purim. Whoever holds out his hand to ask for charity should be given a donation. If you are in a community where there are no poor people, you should either keep the money until you meet needy persons or send it to them. Women too are required to send this and to give gifts to the poor. So I'm not seeing the requirement where it has to go to Jews. Unless you're saying, well, this only applies to people in the land and all that's in the land are Jews. I'm not seeing that connection. So if you can give to Jews, good. If you're not in a position where you can, then you have my permission to give to non-Jews. If I'm wrong, I'll take responsibility for that. All right. Any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns?
Is there any? Sorry, sorry.
Somebody else want to talk?
No. Go on.
Is Purim in the same class with Hanukkah?
Is it in the same class?
Yeah, as the rules and not the same rules, obviously, but is it treated the same way as Hanukkah? It's not a Torah celebration, so it's not a Torah.
Correct. Because Hanukkah, like Purim, is a later holiday, and it's a good question. So look at where you find this. In Mishneh Torah, Hilchot, which means laws, Megillah veHanukkah, laws of Megillah and Hanukkah. So it's even in the same chapter. After chapter 2, we just read chapter 1 and 2, which is Megillah. Then you get to chapter 3, which is Hanukkah. So Hanukkah, chapter 3. There. So yeah, same class. It's even the exact same section in the halakha. This is where you find both. How do I get back to the screen where you guys are here? I think I have to stop screen sharing. Then it allows me to see. Yeah, okay. Chat. Shalom. Yom Tov. I have to get back to this roof job and it's noisy. Okay. Oh, you're back. Good. You've been back for a while. Funny, Yore. You know, we're late too as Jews, you know. In fact, if you're not late, you're not Jewish. That's why we never want to be the first one to show up. Don't see specifying Jew or Gentile on my Kitzer. Again, the Kitzer or the Mishneh Torah, I don't see it. I can't post screenshot of the section, but you literally read it. Yeah. All right. So, all right, we've done 2 hours. Anybody have anything they want to say? It doesn't have to be related to this topic. Just anything at all? Questions or?
I do. I was just waiting for the recording to stop. I didn't want to mess up like the
Oh,
class
okay.
with my
Then
question.
gotcha. Let me stop the recording. Hopefully this works so that I can send this to Rosalind. Okay. When it says end, does that end the meeting or does that end the recording? All right, I'm gonna click end to try to stop the recording. If it ends the meeting, I'll start it right back up. Oh yeah, see that says end meeting. I don't want to do that. Oh, recording, here it is. Stop. All right, for everyone watching the recording, which is probably just Rosalind, and anyone else that specifically asked for it, thank you for being here.